How old were you when you were wielding a pickaxe?
I was 12 and a half, 13, because I worked as a water boy to start. Then I started with the pickaxe, yeah.
So what kind?
Close to 13.
What was the result of that physical labor on a child?
That physical labor on a child had no effect except it was excellent exercise. I mean, I didn't have the power to do much with the pickaxe except what my strength would allow, but I became quite good at it. I would swing with the rest of the guys, and they sang, and they did things. They threw in unisons and stuff, so it made it okay, except I would tire quicker than most, and I would call for the water boy more often than others so I could take a breather. But it was okay, and I kind of felt like a big guy,
Where was church in your life at this point?
At that point, in Nassau, church in my life, my mother started the Anglican Church, which is the English version of Catholic Church, I would imagine. And she moved to the Roman, but I think that move was principally due to the fact that we, as a family, moved from one part of the island to another. From Roscommon, we moved to DeVoe Street, and on DeVoe Street was a Catholic church directly across the street from us, actually on a slight diagonal. And she started going to the Roman Catholic Church then, because we always walked the equivalent of a couple of miles to the first church, the Anglican Church. And we had no other form of transportation. So when we did move to DeVoe Street, it was more convenient for her to be able to go to church just across the street. And in that, she always took me to church with her, not every Sunday. Sometimes I found ways to manage not going. And she did the same on DeVoe Street at the Catholic Church. She wanted me to be in the choir. And the priests and the nuns there, they rather liked her a great deal, and they wanted to accommodate her, and they asked her to bring me in and have me just sing for them, see how I could manage. My mother had no idea, and I didn't, that I was tone deaf. I can't carry a tune in a paper bag, I've been told by many friends. But I sang for them, and I was really terrible. But they wanted to accommodate my mom. So they asked me if I could learn the songs, and sing with the choir, but not let any sound come out of my mouth. That I would kind of pantomime. Like with the rest of the boys, they would do the singing, but I would just speak to it, because I would throw them off key, obviously. So that's how I did it for a bit, but I used to get carried away, and I would eventually just say something, and people in the congregation would wonder what note was that, So I was 86th out of the choir.
But you sang in Lilies of the Field.
I did.
You didn't?
I didn't, no.
Oh, they got somebody who sounded like you?
Yes, there was a wonderful singer and a musical conductor, as a matter of fact, a guy named Lester Jeter, something of that nature. Wonderful, wonderful man who sang for me in that film.
Fooled me.
Yeah, well.
He sounded exactly
good.
like.
No, not really. I mean, I'm glad that people thought I sounded like him, because he did very well. But I can't carry a tune, not at all, not at all.
Come on, Sidney, sing.
No,
sing.
I can't carry a tune.
Amen.
No, I cannot carry a tune. I used to listen and watch my friend Harry Belafonte sing, and I always marveled at such a gift, you know. He was miraculous. He could carry a tune. He could pick up a note instantly. He could hear when it's right and when it's not. Really had that gift. But, you know, some people can't sing. One of them.
Those that can do, and those that can't do other things.
And I did other things, yes.
Let's talk about other things. Let's talk about the girls.
Girls?
Yes.
My daughters?
No, the girls down the street. We're in Nassau.
I know. Girls down the street. Well, there were girls down the street, yes. What do you want to know about girls down the street? What?
I want to know who you were strutting by when you came from the movies, strutting down the street past the little girls.
You want to take me into that territory?
Yes, I do.
Well, this strutting down the street. There was a girl on Ross Corner who lived with her mother and her sister. Her name was Margaret, and Margaret was the most remarkable thing I had ever laid eyes on. And from a distance, I became infatuated with this girl, and, but I was too shy to say anything to her. And I had started going to movies, and I became very, very imbued with cowboys. And I used to walk by her house like a cowboy, you know. And in my own imagery, I was wearing my 2 guns, you know, and that's how I wanted her to see me, as this kind of heroic cowboy guy. Well, of course, to her and her sister and her mom, they were absolutely fascinated by this absolutely insane kid who comes walking around past their house like a barrel. And I never looked over there. I would kind of like glance out of the corner of my eye just to make sure that they're aware that I'm walking by. But I could do that, you see, rather than say, hello, how are you? My name is Sidney. I just came to town and I live at the corner. I couldn't do that. I wasn't that social, and I wasn't that outgoing. I wasn't that comfortable with social things. So the best I could do was to get her attention in a manner that didn't appear that I was trying to get her attention. Hey, what can I tell you? That's what I did when I was 10 and a half years old.
And where was Lurleen?
Lurleen was on Cat Island. Lurleen was an experience on Cat Island, yeah? Sure. Uh-huh. You really are going there, aren't you?
And Willamette?
Yeah. Willamette, yeah. Willamette.
All these crushes.
Yeah, I had crushes. I had crushes, yeah.
Did you ever speak to Willamette?
Yeah, I spoke to Willamette, yeah, I did. I spoke to Willamette. Willamette was subsequent to Margaret, and as Margaret was subsequent to Lurleen. By the time I had a crush on Willamette, I was probably 13 or so. I was an old man by then. Mm-hmm. And that was a wonderful experience. Not that anything happened physically with us, but she was a very delicate personality, very ethereal and gentle. And there was a spirituality to her. She was a little girl, like I was a little boy, but there was that quality, you know, and she just had it. And I kind of like got lost in that.
So you weren't necessarily attracted to the kind of sexy little girls, or you were also attracted, but there was something special about these little girls.
Well, first my own sexuality was just trying to get itself into position for activity, you know, it wasn't matured yet. Come on. But there was something in the personalities. Yes, I think so. I don't know what it was that that attracted me in each instance. I don't know. In Willa May's case, there was this spirituality, this sense of otherworldliness.
So there was a kind of romance about it too.
True. Yes.
What?
Huh?
What?
What?
Just tell me what I said to you.
It was
because it will only be from you, not from me.
It was a kind of romance.
Yeah.
To it, kind of romance to it.
Tell me about going to your first movie.
My first movie. I was taken by my friends, the Ross Corner guys. When I learned they were taking me somewhere, I didn't make any inquiry as to where, because by now they were in a pattern of taking me with them wherever they were going. And I was just along, and we went to this building, and I saw pictures of men with wide-brimmed hats and things around their necks, you know, scarves and stuff. And they were on horses, and there were cows, just pictures of these things. And there was a little window that they went up to, and they put in their money, like a threepenny piece, and they got a little ticket. So they bought mine for me. It's my treat. And we went inside. Now, I don't want to let on to them that I don't know where I am or what's going on. So I went, you know, and I walked into this place, and there are lots of seats. And I saw there were some people sitting, and our guys they kind of got into an aisle, and they sat down, and I sat down among them. And I'm kind of waiting, you know, but I have to give the impression that that I'm cool with all of this, whatever it is. And I sat there, and they sat there, and we talked and carried on, and the lights began to go down. And I wondered what was coming, and the lights went out, and a light came up on a curtain, this curtain that was up, and the curtain opened, and there's this white wall. And suddenly on the white wall, there's writing, you know. And from there, I mean, by now I'm really. And then there's action, people, and images of countrysides and stuff that I'd never seen anything like it. And then there are cows, tons of cows just moving and walking. I am absolutely nuts now, because how could they get all of that stuff in this building? I'm looking, but I have to be cool, because I don't want my friends to know that I'm, like, flipping out. And then the movie begins unfolding, and things and people, and they're talking, and they're looking, and they're riding, and the cows, and they have ropes and all that stuff. Well, I was never so fascinated in my whole life. Nothing in life had been that impactful on my imagination. At the end of the movie, my friends, of course, they got up, you know, and they talking about, oh boy, did you see him hit that guy, and did he ride? And I'm quiet, not saying much. We get outside, and my friends wandered off, heading back for Ross Corner. I went along the adjoining street, around to the back of the movie house. There was a door. And I stood at a distance from the door, waiting for all that stuff to come out to see if I could see anybody coming out. The cows, I couldn't figure. How did they get all those cows in that building? How did they get... I had no idea what film was. None whatsoever. None. I stayed there, and nobody came out. That was a matinee performance in an afternoon around about 3 o'clock. I went and I managed a threepenny piece from somewhere. I went back to that same place that evening for the evening show. And I went up to this little box and I put my thing and they gave me a ticket and I went in and I sat down by myself. And the lights went down. And this big white wall. And then the same things I saw before. Exactly the same things. I really was, it was something. I gotta tell you, it was something. It was something.
When did you figure out that the guys weren't in the back of the theater, in the back of the screen?
Well, I didn't immediately figure it out. It was explained to me in very crude terms by my friends. You know, we talked about it, and they mentioned that it was movies. It was, they didn't say movies, they call it other things, but they described it, and there was some reference to film, that all of this was on something called film, and that is all on there. I couldn't understand it for a while. I accepted what they said, but it took a while for me to grasp the concept. And ultimately I did, of course. But it was an experience. And of course I went back and back and back. And that's where I developed all that cowboy swagger stuff, you know, and stuff like that, because I identified with it so strongly.
Be honest, as a kid, what amazed you on the same level of what amazed Sidney Poitier?
That I would rather be the cowboy than shy Sidney, you know. So.
And you wanted to go to Hollywood to see all the cowboys because that's where they lived, right?
Well, Hollywood came a great deal later in my terms. While I was here in Nassau, my sister Teddy asked me one day, when my father decided to send me away because I was verging on the edge of reform school problems, he decided that he should send me away and to Florida to live with family over there. And then my sister Teddy one day said to me, "What are you going to do when you get there? What would you like to do with your life when you get to America?" I said, "I would like to go to Hollywood and work as a cowboy." I had no idea then that Hollywood was a place where films were made. I thought it was a place where there were lots of cows and that the cowboys I saw were in fact real people who worked with cows and fought off the bad guys, and all that scenario. I had had no frame of reference all of my early life to that point until I started seeing these movies, and also because of the great difference in the two cultures, Cat Island and Nassau. I just wanted I told her I wanted to go to Hollywood and work with cows. And she laughed, I remember. She always laughed with me. She never laughed at me. And that's, I carried that interest. It wasn't until I got to America and had spent some time that I began to learn that Hollywood was not a place where they ran a lot of cows over the terrain. That Hollywood was a place where the films about cowboys were made.
Describe Teddy to me.
My sister Teddy. She was very full of life, a woman, a young girl actually. I think the age difference between us was 5-7 years, I guess. She was a free spirit. That's what I first learned about what a free spirit is like from watching her. She was in tune with something very open and very healthy about life. She laughed easily. She said what she felt in ways that it was never hurtful to anyone. She lived a full life in 34 years. She was dead by then. Died before she was 35. She was the most affectionate person in my family, to me.
Squeeze you and kiss you.
Yeah, she did all those things to me. Squeezed me and kissed me and kind of protected me, like the whipping that she gave William on my behalf. She was great. She was fabulous.
Talk about when she was so sick, and your father sent for the bush medicine guy, and he cured her for 10 years.
Yeah, she took sick when she was in her 20s. And the illness was very severe. My father had her placed in the hospital and stuff like that, and the diagnosis was such that they recommended that he take her home to die.
Be honest. Tell me how interested in you in knowing about this bush medicine guy.
How much weight had she lost?
A lot. She had lost, she had wasted away to nothing. And my father had some interest in bush medicine, because bush medicine is all that we had on Cat Island. When I got a cold, or when any of the other kids were sick, my mom would go to the bush and bring back leaves or stuff from near the waterfront, little sprigs of whatever they were, and she would boil them and feed them as tea or broth or something, and we would get better. I don't know how much of the medicine worked. I don't know how much of what cures were effectuated were not just simply our bodies throwing off these things naturally in a week or two or so. But that's how we lived. When we were sick, Mom or my father would go and get stuff from the bush. And my father, when Teddy was so ill, he heard of a man who was visiting Nassau from one of the other islands, who was a bush medicine person. And as I recall, and as the story goes, he took her home from the hospital, and this medicine man came to see her, and he spent some time looking at her, and then he asked my dad where the forest nearest bush area was, and my father told him where it was, and he went away, and he didn't come back for a couple of days. When he did come back, he came back with roots and leaves and stuff, organic stuff grown in the ground, you know, and from trees. And the instructions were how to prepare them. Some of it was to be boiled, some to be baked, some to be made and crushed to powder after it had been baked for so long. And we were supposed to feed it to her under certain time schedules and stuff. Long story short, in 2 months, she was back on her feet. And in a matter of a few more months, she left and went to Syracuse, New York, because she was offered a job there as a maid in someone's home. And she lived for 10 years after that. Now, was her life extended by the Bushmen? I think so. My father thought so. Just my mom thought so. How? I don't know. I think it was extended because it just was. I mean, she lived 10 years. She gained her weight back. She was a buxom, robust woman before she got sick. And she returned to a buxom, robust woman, and she lived for 10 years. But the truth of the matter is, isn't it, that all we get from modern medicine is something that originated in the bush, isn't it? Mm-hmm. What is interesting to me is how man, over time, through trial and error, stumbled onto these things, or was there some primal instinct that guided them, man, to these bush medicine? Was it all trial and error? Was it, I wonder sometimes, was it how much primal instinct was there, you know? Anyway, she had a wonderful life, died much too soon. But
tell me, before we go off, Teddy, about the time, I know this is jumping ahead, but about the time that you went to see her when she was in Miami and you were going to get married to somebody, and the kind of advice that she gave you. Tell me about Teddy in Miami and why you went there to her.
I was in a hotel room in Miami on my way either to Nassau or from Nassau to New York. And we kind of rendezvoused there, and I hadn't seen her for a bit. And it was a great time we had just talking about things. And I told her that I had met a girl and I was thinking of getting married. And she, in her very typical Teddy manner, she said, "What?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "What are you, crazy?" She said, "You've got so much time to do that." She said, "You've got to live first, so you'll have something to take into a marriage. Live, be yourself, and go out and see the world and do this and do that." And she was painting this picture of what I needed to do to fill potential and stuff like that. And she was just great on that subject. She said, "You're young, and you can do so many things."
How old were you?
Oh God, I was probably 20. Yeah, about 20, 21.
Really a baby.
Yeah. But she was so insistent. And she said, "You can get married later," she said. I didn't get married. I didn't. And largely because of what she said, you know. Because I had to look at it. I was getting married for some reasons that were not sound, you know. Teddy.
Getting married for some reasons that were not sound, but that you were always impelled towards a family, towards creating a family or having someone?
We all are, we're not. I mean, we all are. We have feelings about family. I think they are a part of our makeup. And we have feelings about being with someone. And we have wants and needs that can only be fulfilled with some kind of a relationship with a someone. And that starts hitting you around about that age, you know, and I had seen my mom and dad, which was a very all-time great relationship, and I guess I wanted to reach out for that. I did in time. I've been married more years than I've not, certainly by this time, you know. And it's been terrific.
You wrote about Nassau as a new, ruthless, sophisticated system of tourism and colonialism. Talk about that. How did it specifically change things for all of you and for your parents?
Well, tourism and colonialism is an interesting mix. Was certainly an interesting mix in my life. Tourism is a way of life for some communities in the world because they happen to be lend themselves to that kind of place or atmosphere to which people can go and feel comfortable and enjoy certain geographic advantages like weather and beaches and stuff like that. And that makes certain places commercially attractive for developers and so on and so on. And then when you find it in a colonial place where the local government is administered from Europe, from Britain, as we were, then you find that colonial rule is not necessarily advantageous to the indigenous people because they are separated from the management of the country. The management of the country is achieved through the application of laws designed by a foreign culture, by a power exercised over the lives of the native population by a foreign political influence that does not make room in the body of its laws to accommodate the fairness that would make it a democratic procedure for all concerned. It just simply doesn't. Colonialism never was a democratic procedure for the people who were being colonized. And the Bahamas was no different from Asia and Africa and South America and places like that. So the combination was politically not to our advantage, and the combination of colonialism and tourism had decided disadvantages for our children, educationally speaking, and opportunities, you know. As a matter of fact, the seeds for colonialism's very destruction were sown within itself. Because ultimately, as you can see, and has been witnessed by the world, colonialism withered away largely because it was so unfair to native populations. And in its place came what some people call economic colonialism.
Economic colonialism.
Yeah, and there is some validity to that, but even that you can fight that. You can deal with that a good deal easier than the struggle against colonialism itself, because colonialism itself was very tough to uproot. It was a very difficult process in Africa, difficult process in Asia, where colonial powers were so entrenched, and the laws were designed to perpetuate its existence and stuff like that. We were lucky here that we had we produced men who, in time, just simply decided it was time to challenge and remove colonialism. And such men were, of course, in every country that was ruled by colonialism, ultimately.
Just a minute. Can somebody just stay there and keep people from coming in here? JP, is there?
He's already outside.
Well, why isn't somebody over there? Since we're on it, make the distinction for me of what colonialism was here. How many blacks were in the population, and that these were English people who were sent over to be prime ministers, governor generals, or whatever the designated ruling colonialists were called.
Well, the breakdown racially here in the Bahamas, we were 90% of the population. The native Bahamian black community was about 90% of the population. There was an administrative group of people from England that represented the other 10%, and there were some native whites here. They were, of course, included in the rules and regulations that favored the British, so they reaped the benefits because they were perceived as English and treated as such, whether they were in fact or not, as long as they were white and lived here in the country. They were extended all the favorable benefits, or the benefits of favor that was carried for the colonial administrators. The colonial administrators were the colonial administrators. They were They were the power, the voting was a very unusual set of circumstances where we had the vote as a population, but the manipulation of political procedures was at an expert level on the part of the colonials, so that it took us a very long time to change that. Very, very long time.
Do you believe everything he's saying when it comes to colonialism?
To change that. But we did have guys looking for ways to do that. And we had men, when I was a kid here, I remember guys like Milo Butler, who is a national icon today. He's dead, he's gone. But he and men like Mr. Bain, and among the younger guys, of course, Lyndon Pinling, and all of the young men who surrounded Pinling and his party, a tremendous new energy was developed and nurtured by those men like that. They quickly gathered together the best brains in the country, and many of them among them were lawyers themselves, trained in England, who knew English laws, who knew colonial laws, and they formed the nucleus of what came to be the force that revolutionized the country and led it to independence.
And to overthrowing?
The established, legally overthrowing. We won the government because we were able to mount the kind of opposition to colonial rule within the bounds of the law to win the government, which they did in 1967. It is an independent country and has been an independent country since. And the things that have happened subsequent to that independence, many of which are quite remarkable. You know, we are a free country and an independent body of people, and we're doing very well.
What was your stake in I mean, you have a passion for politics. Was your root in politics more in overthrowing colonialism here and establishing a free or an equitable democracy?
My roots were not in politics. Politics. By the time I left here at 15, 16, politics was not my thing. I was politically ignorant. I had no understanding of it. What I had gleaned about politics was that the ruling power, colonial power, was unfair. That I knew, but how politics really worked, I didn't know. I didn't have the education that would have led me to anything understanding in terms of the specifics of local politics. So by the time I left, I had an admiration for Milo Butler because I had seen him in action. I had an admiration for Mr. Bain and many of the other guys, older men who were fighting against it, you know. And when the younger guys became strong enough and infused sufficiently by the older guys and following in their footsteps, then I began to develop my own interest and understanding of the local politics in specifics. But then, of course, I'm away now. I'm living in America, and I'm in another culture, and another set of political things were surrounding my life there. Though I came here often and was able to be of assistance in the 1967 thrust that liberated the country from colonialism, and subsequent to that time, of course, there were times and circumstances in which I was here and available and offered whatever I could offer under the circumstances. Still, I was in another culture where the job there was it was similarly demanding. You know, the civil rights movement in America was a fearful and exhilarating and unpredictable and wrenching time for blacks and for the country generally, because
Now tell me in the comments, what did the civil rights movement mean to you?
what we were fighting for there were conditions quite similar, all based on color. You know, the color here was pretty much the same thing as color in the United States was then. And so I lived and tried to survive in that culture where color was still mandated by law as a definition of how well you will be treated by the law. The law said in America, you will be treated as less than. The law specified that. It said you will be treated as less than, and that never could. I was always, that really got me. I could never adjust to that. So I became involved in the civil rights movement.
You never came up against any segregation on Cat Island, did you?
Yes, of course. On Cat Island, no, there was none. There was none that I recall.
There was no
absolutely
what?
none. There was the whites on Cat Island were. I don't remember now. In my 10.5 years, there were 2 guys I recall who were there, and their presence did not represent to me a force of either oppression or segregation or stuff. It simply didn't, because mine was a semi-primitive existence on an island that was the politics of Cat Island was of such a measure. It was all taken care of from here, Nassau itself. No, there wasn't that. It was that I understood. It was when I came here that it really popped me right in the face.
Was there segregation here in
Sure,
Nassau?
there was. You couldn't go to movies. You couldn't go to movies that were not designated for black people. You could not live in certain areas. There were certain jobs that we were not allowed to have. Mind you, the truth is, because we were 90% of the population, the 10% of the colonial power was insufficient in numbers to run a healthy tourist community like this. Therefore, they had to have people, and to such extent as we were able with the educational system that existed here, and to the extent that those Bahamians who had the wherewithal to send their children off to school, mostly to England, many to Jamaica, many to the United States, those kids would come back with education and skills, and those skills would allow them to move a little bit upwards in the scale of things, or the scheme of things, in the country, so that the administrators had to have that body of people who were able to acquire skills, either here at home or from abroad in schools, to fill in the necessary cadre of administrating people. At the same time, certain levels were off limits. There were, as they say in America about advancement of women, there was a glass ceiling at various levels. That was the way it was here. Of course, there was segregation in Nassau.
But there wasn't the kind or the ferocity of it here, the way it was in the States.
Segregation here was segregation here. It differed from the United States principally because we were 90% of the population. As a result, a black Bahamian child would vortex within the confines of that black community. And within it, that child was, though it was a segregated society, that child was exposed to images of leadership, importance. Example, that child knew there were black doctors, there were black policemen everywhere they went, there were black government officials, there were some of the most successful men in the country were black lawyers, administrators and educators, so that the child could see that there was room and places for them to go. They could see a policeman, they could see a lawyer, they could see a doctor, they could see a school principal and say, I want to do that. And they saw them in profusion in the context of the 90%.
And where it was their black country.
And it was their black country, of course. Or rather, they were the indigenous people of the country. They were the indigenous people of the country. So, the difference in the United States, I think, at that time was the power of the country was in the numbers of the mainstream community that had fashioned the laws that defined me and defined other blacks. That definition was an unfair definition designed to circumscribe, designed to contain, designed to relegate, so that the life was a separate existence that was not at all fair or equal, neither in opportunity or any of the other criteria that would make fairness, that would articulate what fairness is. That didn't exist. And the struggle there was tougher because you had 10% fighting the 90%.
Mm-hmm. Just the opposite.
Just the opposite.
Just the opposite.
Just the opposite. And the struggle there, very much like the struggle here and the struggle in other parts of the world, began with guys, not just with the guys who were around when I was a boy, but guys who were from other generations long gone. You know, there were men and women from the days of slavery, whose lives and whose names are probably forgotten forever, but who took a position.
Here in Nassau?
No, in America.
Oh, in the States.
It took a position and lived a life of protest. Their lives represented a protest against things as they were. Across American history, there are black people whose lives were registered protests, the way they lived their lives. And out of that history, over time, it was a long time, came others who lived and died and registered their protest and did what they can and lived as best they could under the conditions and try to raise a family and send their kids to what schools that they were able to, and there weren't that many. And in time, a generation arose that said, hey, now is the time. And they articulated what the general concept was, which was, it's time for change now. It's morally time, ethically time. It's just time for democracy to either be what it can possibly be, or
What's interesting to me, Sidney, is that within the framework of your life, first on Cat Island and then on Nassau, where you were part of the 90%, you brought that at 15 to the United States.
mm-hmm.
So that there was already a very, very strong sense of pride and entitlement.
Yeah, pride and entitlement I carried with me. I carried with me from here, there, to America. I brought it with me from Cat Island here. You know, I had 10 and a half years there. And then I had 4 years here, 4 or more years here. So that by the time I got to America, I had a sense of myself. And the sense of myself included my attitudes about myself gathered from the body of that 90%. I saw what I could be. I saw what was possible for me. And then, having seen that, having tasted of that, having felt that, when I got to America, having felt that, when I got to America, there was a preconception of a slot I was expected to fit. And I looked at the preconception, I looked at the slot, and I said, that's not where I intend to find my place. And the suggestion was, no, your place, we have decided your place for you. And I said no. I was strong enough only because I came from this culture where I was in the 90%, and I had enough, I had enough pride and expectation is what covers it, I would think.
It sounds to me like they tried to break him, but he wouldn't allow it. Tell me your thoughts about that in the comments.
And then I got to a place where the laws were absolutely written out.
In Miami?
Yeah, absolutely written out as to what I was according to the law, what I could expect according to the law, how far I would go according to the law. And I started resisting that right away.
Tell me about that incident with the sheriff, where you were wandering around the streets and somehow you wandered into the sheriff thing and he said, "Where are you going, nigger?" or something.
No, I don't want to talk about that. Don't want to talk about that. But it was...
Well, talk about the how it affected you, the brutality of that.
I can't talk about... Brutality is not always just physical, you know.
No.
Okay, so the brutality that interests me most was the brutality of denial.
Exactly.
Right. And that's what concerned me most when I was a young man in America, the brutality of denial, you know. So, I mean, incidents, there were, there's no need dwelling on incidents that took place, incidents that we can pop out of the whole scope of my life in America. That's of no value, really. I mean, I could tell you stories of things that happened that were brutal and really demeaning, and I could get into that, but I don't want to. There's no point in wallowing in that stuff. What is interesting, though, is the brutality of denial. To have a blanket definition of an individual, of a personality, of a human being, that has no nuances to it, that definition. It is blanket, it is block, it is unrefined, it is just that way. And all your life, therefore, if you are going to survive as a result of accommodating that definition, you have to begin to twist your life and your self-perception and your values, and you bend them a little here and you twist them a little here. Not with intent to satisfy, but with an acquiescence to what is you perceive to be the only way to stay alive. You've got to have some kind of a peace made between you and this thing. That's cruelty. I mean, that's to tell you the truth. For a lot of people, it was very difficult. I mean, I'm not saying that it was difficult for me. It was difficult for all black people. And it left a mark. So that is what I think about mostly when I think about my journey in America. because any physical brutality doesn't really cover it, because that can be limited to incidents. But this was an overall resonance constantly, you know. Mind you, now we're speaking of an America where today wonderful progress has been made, and that too is undeniable. You can't deny that has happened in appreciable ways. Not sufficient to level the playing field altogether. It's still tilted somewhat. Not sufficient to put racism behind us altogether. It's not there yet. There's been a status change in it, here and there, but it's still with us, you know.
I want to ask you a question. African Americans who are born in America and who grow up with a very different sense of themselves than you as a poor boy in the Bahamas were so far ahead in terms of what you felt you could do, what the horizon held was for you, what your expectations could be. A black kid growing up in America didn't have that strength, that community, that sense of looking around and seeing a doctor here, a lawyer there.
Well, let me speak to that for a second.
Please.
This whole sense of the difference between my upbringing and the difference and that with the American black child, right?
Yeah.
I went to America with much of myself already congealed. And I come from a culture here in the Bahamas where we were 90% of the population, which allowed me to go to America with a sense of myself. The American black child didn't, to a large extent, have that kind of, certainly not that atmosphere of being a part of a 90%. They were a part of a black community, certainly. But the black community was a 10% part of a 100 whole. So, the truth of the matter is, the black child who survived the American thing had a harder struggle than the black child who survived the Bahamian thing, because of the 90-10, 10-90 situation. And therefore, it is even more remarkable that the black child in America turned out to be Thurgood Marshall and Roy Wilkins and Paul Robeson and Walter White, and the head of the Urban League, Mr. Whitney, I've forgotten his last name, A. Philip Randolph, and the black historians that we have and have had. I mean, there's a body of young black children who survived all that in the context of being the 10 in the 90. It was a hell of a lot tougher for them being the 10 in the 90 than it was for me being the 90 being oppressed by the 10, you see. So I played Thurgood Marshall, the life of Thurgood Marshall, and I researched the life from the time he was a student, even before. And you saw, you talk about a passion, you talk about a sense of self, you talk about a commitment. Nowhere I went in the Bahamas, nowhere was I ever threatened physically.
About the first time you were threatened, whether it was about your life or threatened towards somebody else's life.
I mean, I didn't walk around this country with any sense of there is a threat abroad in this land and I have to keep my wits about me on that score. Here was a guy who roamed America, going from state to state, into territory where he was not wanted by the established power, a part of which was a violent segment. He was, in reading about him, in order to play him, I found a man, and I found stories about a man who was hounded and who was chased by guys with not good intent. Amazing. And he did it year in and year out and year in and year out and year in and year out. And he was one. There were many others. Robeson, in a different way, lived a life. How much strength and courage a guy like that had to have to say, here is who I am, and this is how I am. To say that against a 90 is a hell of a lot tougher than saying it against a 10. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And then, of course, in my business, there were guys like Canada Lee. There were all kinds of people across the spectrum of my career from when I first started at American Negro Theater. There were names of people who persevered and stayed the course and all that stuff. So, it was different, the cultures. And one ought not to get the impression that it was better for me that I came out of this culture. The only thing that was good for me is I came out of this culture better armed to deal with the new culture that I was going into.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Better armed.
Better armed.
Because
Just in case you didn't know who Robeson is, Paul Robeson is the first black man on TV.
there was no threat of death for a child here.
Right. Yeah.
There are children in America, in the black neighborhoods, who face threats of death, which is just inconceivable here.
Well, yeah, it is. The threat of death to American children, black children, there was a time when there was that was a possibility, and but the fear that ensues, living where you are asked to fit into a block, a slot, the slot itself doesn't speak well of you. It's. But you also are aware that behind the threat that is represented by the slot you have been directed to is a power that punishes if you don't find accommodation within it, you see. At least in my early days, I didn't have that. Here, the punishment was I'd go to reform school, maybe, and a part of that might have been my own fault, my own problem. But But I was, it was different. It was tougher. It was tougher for those guys, you know. In America, it was tougher.
There's a kind of a joy and a fun, not only in you, I mean, because this has been a learning experience for me, in your family. The whole family has a very free, loose, joyous, there's a lot of laughing that goes on. And I think that too was something that you brought from here that was like unstampable out. Maybe it was the thing that Teddy had.
Well, you're talking about a joy. You mentioned a joy of laughter and a kind of openness and a kind of expression of life and stuff. Yeah, that's a part of life here. Was a part of life here for me. My sister was a perfect example of that. And people laughed and expressed themselves, and they had an ease with each other. If you ever went to a church here, you'll find that the people there's an ease with their religion, and there's an ease with how they deal with each other, you know. But I suspect that is not so unique to the Bahamas. I think it might very well be a thing close to societies that are the less mechanized society, the more likelihood you'll find that kind of ambiance. I think mechanized societies give off a rhythm unto itself that influences the behavior of the inhabitants of that society. It might be subtle, and maybe not so subtle, but there are influences that kind of emanates from this mechanized society. You take a city like New York City, that I love a lot. You walk down the street of New York, if you open up a camera on New York City at any given part of the day, and you put a similar camera on Bay Street here in Nassau, the pace, it differs. It differs. Now, the reason I think the pace differs is because in New York, the fact of numbers, in terms of humans, you've got 7 or 8 million people. 7 or 8 million people of a variety of cultures. The survival syndrome on an average level requires a kind of pace. And what is making this requirement of this pace? I think it's the mechanized nature that makes living in a community of 8 million possible. In order for 8 million people to live in that kind of proximity, there has to be mechanization. There has to be all kinds of mechanized ways of functioning. And that mechanized way of functioning itself leaves its imprint on the sensibilities of the population. So that walking down Fifth Avenue, you can tell the strollers. You can tell the strollers. They're walking down Fifth Avenue, and the lady is holding on to her guy's arm, and they're window shopping, and they're kind of looking around. And for every pair of strollers, you've got dozens of people. They're just going this way and that way, and they're getting here. You know, that's the way a city is. Okay. When you were on Cat Island with me, The pace is way different than it is here in Nassau. You will drive down the main road in Cat Island and you see a few people walking along, and they will stop and chat with someone, or they're sitting about enjoying and chatting, or they're just kind of like moving about that way. It is the absence of the mechanized society plus the numbers. Here, the numbers are more, the society is more mechanized, and what have you found? You found that traffic is this and that. So, there you are.
When you got to Miami, well, tell me first about moving in with Cyril.
My brother Cyril?
Yeah.
I moved into my brother. My father sent me to him. That's where I lived, and it was wonderful. He had a wife, has a wife. He's passed away now, my brother Cyril. His wife is still alive. And I stayed with them, and it was an interesting experience. I was in a learning mode then, getting accustomed to the new culture. I didn't stay in Miami long. I didn't like Miami very much. And before long, I was off.
But before we go off, tell me about the 2 ways that you learned how to use the telephone.
How I learned to use the telephone? I learned to use the telephone by trial and error. I didn't know how to use the telephone. I had no idea how to use a telephone. In America, what I did was I just simply wanted to know how to use a telephone. And I would pick up a payphone, and I would put the nickel in, and in those days it was a nickel. I put the nickel in the thing, and I would just dial numbers and listen. Now, of course, sometimes I didn't dial enough numbers, and sometimes I dialed too many numbers. But I kept doing it, trial and error, and I stumbled on to the exact number of numbers. And I and I would listen, and lo and behold, the phone would ring. And somebody picked it up and said, hello, and I hung it up very quick. That was the process of how I learned to use a telephone.
And how did you learn how to drive a car?
I learned how to drive a car pretty much the same way. I didn't know how to drive a car before I went there. It was during the war, and there were lots of jobs available, and therefore a lot of jobs available to blacks, and one of which was in parking lots, which seems to me to be a wonderfully exotic way of making a living. But I didn't know how to drive. So I went to this parking lot and I stood by the entrance where people would get out of their cars and receive a ticket or something. And then the car would sit there until one of the attendants came, got into it, and drive it off. Well, what a better opportunity to watch and see how it's done. So I stood really close, and a guy would come up, open the door, sit in, and I would look for whatever the ritual was. He would turn on a key, and I would pay attention to that. But I knew things were happening down with his feet, and I had no idea what they were. So I got myself in a position ultimately to see what was going on. And I figured out all the things, and after watching for a while, I went and made application for a job somewhere. And they asked me if I could drive. I said yes. And I got in the car. They said, take that car and put it in that place. I got in the car, and I moved that car about 15, 20 feet okay, and then it started to buck on me, and then I got fired. Didn't get fired, I wasn't even hired, but I got to get out of there. But I learned how not to make the car buck. So the next place I went to, I got to a place, and I was supposed to put the car in this particular slot, but then I didn't have the maneuverability yet. So I made some mistakes and was fired. I kept doing it, learning a little bit at a time.
You kept going to parking lot after
I
parking?
ran through so many parking lots, you have no idea. About the 7th or 8th or 9th parking lot, by now I know what to do. Mind you, I don't have the expertise, but I know what to do with my feet, and I know how to touch the brakes so that they don't. And I know what to do with this. I had the shifting down on certain cars, but I didn't have the shifting down on the regular kind of shift that you, yeah. So anyway, long story short, I did that often enough that I actually learned to drive. I was never, ever able to hold a job as a parking attendant because I obviously didn't know how to do it expertly, to zip in and back up and do all that stuff. But I learned to drive that way, and I had to go on elsewhere to find employment for survival's sake.
And the other thing I wanted you to tell about was trying to leave Miami by train. That no matter how far you went, that you always found yourself in Miami again before you managed to get a job and get out of there.
Well, I tried to get out of Miami many times by train, by hoboing, by hopping the freight. I did hop freight many times, but I didn't know where they were heading, and I often wound up the line, upstate Florida, in Tampa or Palm Beach or someplace like that. And the freight would be side-tracked on a siding somewhere and left. And I would have to, one or two instances, I had to walk in search of the nearest town because it was a sidetrack out of town. I made many attempts to get out of Florida. I had no money to do it with, so I decided to take the freight train. But it was more than that. I mean, I was by then influenced somewhat by motion pictures. You know, I'd seen so many of them in Nassau that taking the freight train was, I saw that on screen, and it seemed to me as good a way to travel as any if you didn't have any money. But eventually, I got a job to go to the mountains in Georgia to work, and they gave me a ticket, a bus ticket, and I went to this place in Georgia, and I worked in a kitchen in the mountains.
But also explain that your frame of reference on a place was like Nassau. So you always thought you'd be in another state if you got on the train.
Well, I knew America was a big place, obviously, but I didn't know that Florida is a very long state. I mean, from Miami to Jacksonville is a long way. Certainly from Miami to Atlanta, Georgia, was a long way. I went from Miami to Atlanta by bus to this job in the mountains. And then when I got to Atlanta, I had to change buses and take another bus up into the mountains. The distances was also a surprise to me. And when I left the mountains and headed for New York at the end of a summer during which I had worked and saved $39 and decided I was going to go on to New York was quite a ways away. I had no idea that it would take a day and a night and part of the next day to finally get there.
Why did you leave Cyril and his family and go on your own? I mean, how old were you when you were really on your own in Miami?
Oh, I was on my way. I was past 15. I was on my way to 16, or close to it. Why I left my brother Cyril's house? I had the world. The world was open to me. I didn't like Miami. I didn't adjust to the segregation stuff, and I went out into the world. I thought it best for me to go out into the world. I had to go out into the world. But you see, I was curious, and my curiosity drove me. I had to go out. I didn't like Miami, so I had to go elsewhere. And elsewhere meant wherever I could go. And if it was not terrific there, I would find someplace else to go. I was looking for comfort. I was looking for safety. I was looking for ease. I'd look a long time, but I didn't know that. And I just went out into the world. And New York was out into the world.
Were you always sure that you would find a job that you could, earn? Now, was there any ever fear mixed with all this curiosity?
I never feared survival, because this was during the war, and getting a job was not that difficult. The jobs that I found most suited to me were dishwashing jobs, because I would get meals. I would earn a salary, but I would have at least 2 meals per day while I worked. And I kind of, got into that. But I never feared. I knew what the society was. I knew myself, but I didn't fear the segregation in Miami. You see, I left Miami long before any of that stuff began to just be heavy over my head. I didn't like Miami, and I wanted to get away from there. The slot made itself very evident to me. Here's where you will be. And I said no. And I wanted out. And I left. I went to work in Georgia. When I came down from the mountains at the end of the summer, I went to New York. And in New York, I found a kind of safety, because there was this large black community there. And I was arrested by the phenomenal energy of the city. I just was occupied by it, not fearful. If I was fearful, I wouldn't have left Miami. If I was really fearful,
I wouldn't have left Cyril.
I wouldn't have left Cyril. I would have stayed there. But never was there enough concern about fear to alter wherever my curiosity was leading me. I went. Now, mind you, I could have gotten killed anywhere along the line, because that's how some places were. Some places were. I walked through more threatening situations than I was aware of. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. It was really looking back on it that you saw.
Looking back on it, I saw the dimensions of some of those situations. But even when they were there, I mean, I knew what a bad situation was for me. But I could handle bad situations. I mean, unless they came upon me suddenly, and I'm overwhelmed by the suddenness of it. But ordinarily, I could smell out circumstances that needed to be avoided, or such things as I could do to neutralize them. You know, I had that ability from living in the Bahamas. I mean, I lived on Cat Island, and I lived here in Nassau, and I knew Nassau. I first became aware of class, what the class system was in Nassau. I learned about class here, because everywhere I went, there was class was saying to me, things are different here. What you're used to is not what you're going to find here. That's what class is. And what you will find here is what you will have to accommodate yourself to. But even at a young age, I could smell that. Therefore, when I went to the States, I was able to smell slots, class, segregation, discrimination, unfairness. All of these were signposts that were no strangers to me, you see. So, if one seemed too close for comfort, I at least instinctually knew how to just slide out of its range as best I could, or move around it and on my journey. So it isn't that I was oblivious of all that was there. I certainly was of some of the specifics, like if, for instance, I got caught in a civil disturbance in New York City once, and the cops were firing guns and people were scattering and stuff and so. Now, if something like that happens, it's out of the ordinary, and it's unexpected, and I could have gotten killed. But generally, I was able to sense that, what was heading my way.
Why was it that you didn't get back in touch with your family for 8 years?
Why was it I didn't get back in touch with my family for 8 years? Simple. In the Bahamas, as was the case in most Caribbean countries, when you leave for America, you are leaving for a place where the streets are paved with gold. Mm-hmm. Mm. And when you arrive in a place where it is thought the streets are paved with gold, if you come, and most people do come from very poor families, it is expected that you would gather up gold and send it home to help the family in their survival efforts. That was very strong in me because my father's situation was very bad. And it was tough. And I was very young, and I expected that I would be able to help them. When I got to working in the United States, I suddenly found myself between trying to maneuver between need and want in a new society where there was plenty of everything. The discipline necessary to function within the narrow channel between want and need was more than my age appropriateness could handle, you know?
Yeah.
Can you repeat? You hit your microphone.
It was more than my age appropriateness could handle. So when I earned $20 or $26 from my dishwashing, the power of want overwhelmed me. Here I am, I've got $26, 7 of which is going to go for rent. But I could buy pair of pants if I paid down $1 a week for such and such a time. I could do this, I could do that. Mind you, it wasn't a lot, but I had this $24. On the other side of my want were my needs. Had I concentrated on need, I might have been able to send home $1 from time to time. I wasn't old enough nor disciplined enough. And it seemed to me, if you have nothing to put in the envelope. So, with that being the case, month after month fell away, and over time it became a habit, and eventually it became too late. What do you say? What is your excuse? So the 8 years were years of growing up, of assuming manhood and its burdens too early. When I came back, I was a young man, still a young man.
Be honest in the comments. What for you defines a manhood?
But I was a man. And I came back because I was a movie actor by then. And I had made a film, and I had earned what to me was an incredible amount of money. I earned $750 a week for 4 weeks. And then I had enough gold. Instead of sending it, I thought I'd take it. And I came home.
So what was that experience like? What movie was it, and what was that?
The movie was called No Way Out, as a matter of fact, at 20th Century Fox. My first job as a film actor. It starred Richard Widmark and Linda Darnell. Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee were in it.
It was a good movie.
Dutch Johnson. It's a pretty good movie. And I came back to Nassau after that, just for a visit so that I could see my folks again. But I was able to bring some gold with me. You know, you don't know how much it meant both ways. There is the self-disgust that you couldn't manage in 8 years to accumulate any monies to send home, on the one hand, and then the joy and the pleasure on the other hand, having suddenly earned this $3,000 after you've paid your taxes and agency fees. You're still left with a considerable amount. I was able to go home, and I came home. It was the first time in 8 years.
I'll wait till that guy goes. Describe your homecoming. Describe coming to the house.
I got off the plane, and it was evening. I took a taxi. I told the cabbie where I was going, and he took me to DeVoe Street, to my home. I got out, I paid him, he took off, and I had my little suitcase. and there was a light in the window of the kitchen, and I headed towards the light, and I got to the window, which was propped open with a stick, and I heard voices. It was my mom and my dad. And they were sitting at the table. I peeked in. They were talking, just the two of them, as they always did. And I just stood there listening to them for about 2 minutes, just listening to them. And then I decided to enter. I walked past the window, around to the back of the kitchen, to the door, which was open, and I stepped in. And they looked up, and they saw me with this little suitcase that I was carrying. And they looked, then they looked at each other, and back to me. And my mother said, "Kermit?" And I said nothing. Kermit is the oldest, was.
Describe for us the first time you arrived home after you left.
Then the oldest son of my brother Cyril, who lived in Miami. And I said nothing. And my father chuckled a little, and he looked at my mother, puzzled, both of them, absolutely puzzled. I said nothing. I'm looking at them. And out of somewhere, it struck my mother, and she screamed, and she leaped up from the table, and she just threw herself through the air right on top of me, and she grabbed a hold of me, and she hugged me, and both of her arms were behind me by now, and she was holding on to me, and she was beating my back like that with her hands. And it was some time. It was some time. And my father was very happy. He was all smiles and giggling and clapping and stuff. And my mother told me all the things, still holding on to me, mind you, all the things that had transpired with her, how she thought I was dead. And she always prayed, she said, for a sign. She said she wanted to know if I was or not.
If you were what?
Dead. And oh dear. She wouldn't let go of me. So I had to kind of walk with her on top of me, and we kind of sat down together. And then my father said, "Evelyn, get the boy something to eat."
So she alternatively hugged you and hit you.
Mm-hmm.
Beat you and say, "Why didn't you get in touch with me?"
Oh,
what did she say?
Well, she chastised me pretty good for not being in touch and that's stuff like that. And she let me know, and she was always a woman who spoke her mind, and she let me know that I wasn't really, that I shouldn't have done it. And but the occasion was such that I think I I escaped that. I dodged that bullet a little bit. That was some homecoming, I'll tell you. It was some homecoming for me. And they had no idea where I'd been, what I'd been doing, and the fact that I had just finished making a movie was, they couldn't get it. They couldn't get it because they were not moviegoers. They couldn't understand what that meant, and they didn't try. I mean, it was like a blank stare, and they would nod and say, "Oh, that's nice," not knowing what it meant, you know. So, that's the way it was with my mom and me when I came back after 8 years.
And what was the problem about showing No Way Out here?
Well, the picture was...
Got to get some... Are you hearing my stomach talk?
No, he's...
It's not in his thing?
I just want to close this down the door.
So,
so what was the situation with showing your movie?
my movie was persona non grata here by the movie censors. They wouldn't allow it in the country for colonial and racial reasons. There was nothing about the film that was salacious. It was quite a good film, but this country had not had that experience of having one of its citizens a film actor and playing a principal part in a film. They perceived it as propaganda unbecoming their colonial disposition.
Let her shut the door first.
So the film, they didn't want to show it. There were Bahamians who said that you have to show it. So they just challenged the censor board, and they relented.
Which Bahamians?
Well, the black Bahamians principally. And they showed it. They showed the film. See, there was a censor board here that determined what films not to be shown. The films that they did show almost never had any black people in them. And if in fact they did, they were in positions of subserviency. Those were fine, but the kind of parts I played, they perceived them as threats for whatever reason, and they were all geared up to ban my picture, my first movie.
Be honest in the comments. Why do you think they deemed the characters he played in the movies as a threat?
Just because you were in it and playing the lead.
Just because I was playing the lead. Just because I was in it and playing the principal part.
And because you weren't a convict and you weren't the bad guy?
I was like they were unaccustomed to. So
who showed it?
First, the censor board had to be convinced to back down, and it did. Then the local theater had to screen it, and the local manager of that theater, which was a theater in the black community, one of three that we could go to, He was a black Bahamian manager, and he knew my folks, so he invited my parents and the family to come and see the movie on the opening night.
And what was it like for your mother?
Well, for my mom, it was a kind of a traumatic experience, because the picture was a picture about, I was a doctor in a hospital, and Richard Widmark accused me of being responsible for his brother's death. His brother they were both criminals, and he was going to get his revenge on me, and at the end, he got me in the basement, and he pistol whipped me with the gun. His intent was to do that before he shot me. And he is beating on me with this, my mom, who is not a moviegoer. She jumped up in the theater and she said, "Hit him back, Sidney, hit him back, hit him back." Well, that's my mother. I mean, that's the way she was, and also not accustomed to movies. She didn't know that it was a movie, and she was so wrapped up in what was going on that was her response. She wanted me to hit him back,
And that's what had happened to you in America. Was probably she thought that's what had happened to you.
Yeah, she saw it as real, and that was her reaction. That was her response for me to hit him back.
Then you began coming back regularly and eventually built a home on Winton Highway. Did you want your daughters to have a sense of Bahamian identity and to know this family here?
Yeah, certainly. I wanted my daughters to have a sense of the Bahamas, a sense of the family here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I built the house. Yeah.
And do they?
Sure they do. Yes.
When did you become a national hero?
When did I become a national hero?
Yeah.
Wow. You characterize me as a national hero?
Well, Sidney, one only has to see you on the streets or in the church or whatever to see that you are the most recognizable figure and so close. I mean, it's not like you're a distant figure.
Let me know in the comments, do you look at Sidney Poitier as a national hero?
Here, it's like you're a member of the family who they love and revere.
I am a film actor, and there is a response here to that. National hero are men like Kendall Isaacs and Cecil Wallace Whitfield and Lyndon Pindling and many others. Milo Butler that I mentioned to you before, and Mr. Bain. They're national heroes of the Bahamas. I'm a movie actor who is a Bahamian with Bahamian roots. But they respond to me in that context, which is great. I love it. I mean, I'm well known and well received and well respected here for what I do. What I do evokes from them an appreciation and a respect. That's the truth of it. National hero, no.
It's not just a question of you being an actor. I mean, and we certainly are not going into this section of it now. You know, we will later. But it was a question of you establishing a men of dignity and outrage and humanity in a way that nobody was ever allowed to do so before. You were the one who went out ahead and did it. And so no, it was not just you as an actor, it was you as this person from the Bahamas who had that sense of purpose that people relate to.
Well, if you are right, they relate to those qualities they see in characters I've played. Okay, I'll buy that. I take some responsibility for the selection of the characters I play. So there is some dovetailing of one to the other, and yeah, okay, that's fine. But national hero, no. I like the reception I get when I'm home, because what I'm getting is the concurrence of my fellows. Do you know what I mean? It's I'm.
Let me know in the comments, what was your favorite Sidney Poitier movie?
I'm offered their appreciation, and I'm offered they're saying, I like what you've done, or I thank you for bringing me a moment or two from time to time of enjoyment, and that's great. I take that, and I accept it quickly, wholeheartedly. I accept it. National hero is a broader, deeper, wider term, and this is a politically conscious community, and the big heroes in this community are the ones who were instrumental in bringing the country to independence. They are the ones. I might have made contributions along the way, large or small, but the truth is the national heroes here that are the current among the young ones, for instance, are the young men who are trying to preserve what they perceive as their Bahamian culture, trying to keep it from being too obscured by the enormous presence of another culture close by, and the intrusion or the inclusion of images from another culture coming in via electronically displayed television, simply put. You know, it's a struggle still. It's a struggle still. We are a community here. We offer our best to those who wish to come for a vacation, for a rest, for a honeymoon, for a visit to enjoy what we have here. But too, you know, we are in the modern world, and we have problems that are commensurate with the rest of the modern world. And those questions have to be addressed. And there are young people trying to address them. And so we have, following the generation that brought us independence, we have youngsters who are trying to take us farther and make us stronger, and doing that. Those are the national heroes. I come for an occasional visit. I have this responsibility as ambassador to Japan from the Bahamas that requires me to function on behalf of the country, and I do that with pleasure. But it is my celebrity that makes that a useful activity on the country's behalf. I am aware of that. I offer it with great pride, because my mother and my father, my sisters and my brothers are all Bahamians. And this country is much a part of me as is America. And I was born there. And I am fundamentally an American.
Fundamentally an American?
Mm-hmm. Fundamentally an American because my years subsequent to my departure, you're talking about almost 60 years. That I lived with an American sensibility. I lived as an American in America, and I live with all of the attendant influences of race and class and position and economics and education and all those, whatever those things meant. I became a part of all of that stuff, you know. So I am an American. I am also a Bahamian, and there is no law that I adhere to that says differently. I mean, I am in my guts an American, and my guts I'm a Bahamian.
Do you look at yourself just as an American, or do you look at yourself as more than American? Let me know in the comments.
I don't think there is any conflict in that, because that's what I am. I mean, 60 years in America, or close to 60 years in America, and those years, those 10 and a half years here, that's what I'm made of. I'm made of American and Bahamian stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's your stuff.
Yeah.
How did this ambassadorship come about? How did you involve yourself with the social structure and with politics?
Well, the ambassadorship was the idea of the Prime Minister, the Honorable Hubert Ingram, and of course I suspect he had the concurrence of his fellows in that regard. The approach was made to me, and I thought about it, and I said, yes, of course I would. If I can be of service to the country in that regard, I would be honored. And they did. They submitted me to the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs as its ambassador. Arrangements were made for me to come to Japan and make my credentials, present my credentials to the emperor. I did. I went to Japan. I presented my credentials to the Emperor of Japan. He received me, accepted my credentials, and I was officially a representative from the Bahamas to Japan. And I have had certain duties that are quite real, and I've been busy attending them, and it's wonderful. The fact that I am a fairly well-known person helps a lot in the job and to the benefit of the country. So it's wonderful. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in the Bahamas makes sure that I am up to speed on all the questions relating to the relationship between ourselves and Japan. And whenever I am in need of the necessary advisement or briefing, I will come down and so be briefed, or someone will brief me in New York, and I would get on a plane with whomever is accompanying me from the ministry, and we go to Japan and do the business of the country and come back. That essentially is what I do as ambassador. But I'm sure I am mindful, certainly, of the effects that my being the ambassador might have on helping the image of our country in terms of what we do here. What we do is we are a tourist-oriented society, and we wish to have more Japanese, as we do more people from any other culture, come and visit and take part in what we have to offer. So I'm mindful of that, and that's wonderful with me.
The Japanese had invested heavily in Hawaii. I mean, it became almost a Japanese island in a certain sense. And then when they started to get into financial difficulty, there was like a pulling out from the island. How does their financial problem affect your approach to them?
Their financial problem, first of all, their financial problem is going to be a temporary problem in time. But the relationship with Japan and us is a relationship that's based on our desire to have the relationship itself deepen and broaden and to include many other aspects. Right now, it includes some aspects of agriculture. We have an agricultural product that we would like very much to have the Japanese buy. They are very fond of it, very, very fond of it, and we're in the process of enhancing that aspect of our relationship. Of
What
course,
is it?
Grapefruit. We have a fantastic grapefruit that we grow in the Bahamas, and we export that grapefruit. We have many. We are the 5th or 6th largest ship registration country in the world. We want to enhance that. We want to increase the number of ships that are registered under our flag. There's the question of tourism. However many more Japanese we can encourage to come and visit with us as tourists, that's a part of our program. Investments here in the Bahamas by the Japanese nationals, Japanese corporations, is another part of the portfolio. We have wonderful investment opportunities here. The Japanese are interested, as are many people in Hong Kong, with what we can do and offer to their businesses as a transshipment port. For instance, in Freeport, Grand Bahama, we have a transshipment port that is called the Whampoa Transshipment. That's an enormous conglomerate in Hong Kong, and they deal with moving goods to South America, moving goods to the eastern seaboard of the United States, etc. And they have this transshipment port that is absolutely extraordinary up in Freeport. I visited it, and it is a huge bit of industrial inclusion for our country. And everywhere you look, there are opportunities for Japan and the Bahamas to enhance their relationship. I am the instrument, or one of the instruments, that is being used to that end. Diplomacy is an activity that can be learned largely, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have been been sculpting me and helping me to know and to understand. In the meantime, I come with a celebrity that does have an effect, maybe not much, but at least gets us noticed sometimes in areas where it's important.
And you must, when you come back here, have a sense of an arc of your life, starting out as, tomato farming and ending up here as an ambassador for your country. That this journey you've gone on has been an extraordinary event, catapulting you into extraordinary new adventures.
New adventures. New adventures. Yeah, well, my journey has been an adventure, and the being an ambassador is a part of the adventure, and stuff. I don't stop long to evaluate or to take stock of it. I mean, it's so much of it has happened that I didn't engineer, so I don't, and I know that I didn't do it all by myself. This journey was a collective effort. Nature and God and me and lots of good people whose paths I've crossed, and all kinds of combinations went into the weaving of this journey for all these years. So when I take stock, if ever I do, I first look at that, you see, and that prohibits me from coming up with any ego-oriented conclusions, you know.
The journey is quite a journey, Sidney.
Yeah, but it is a journey with many parts and many energies driving it. Many energies driving it. There is a case that can be made for it having been predetermined, depending on your philosophical point of view, depending on one's religion.
Do you believe that?
I don't disbelieve it because I have no proof, nor am I seeking proof. But objectively speaking, since we don't know what, if there is anything to the philosophical suggestion that predetermination is a possibility, or whether predetermination is just wishful thinking, there is no evidence substantial enough to come down on either side. So it has to remain in the inactive possibility area. So we put that aside. If you eliminate that for the moment, then how do you explain the journey? If you eliminate that, then you have to say, well, serendipity, chance, luck, and serendipity, chance, luck, the accident of randomness and chaos mixed with all of the other imponderables. That too is possible, you see, and not only in my journey, in every journey. Because if randomness and chaos are ingredients in nature itself, and they are, at least we've been able to nail that down through science. then not only does it exist, or could it exist, just in scientific terms, as it does, for instance, in what we call, or what is well known as the some subatomic area they call, what do they call it? Anyway, think of it in a minute. But as we look at these areas of imponderables, our best judgment is either, yeah, some of that's possible, or no, some of that's not possible, or none of it's possible, or none of that. We don't know. But what we do know is that logic and reason, which is the yardstick we measure everything by, including ourselves, and logic and reason is a tool developed out of trial and error. That's how we conclude that something is likely to happen, is because we've tried and the percentages were. So logic and reason is not an exact science either, but that's the best yardstick we have. And logic and reason tells us that there's a possibility that predetermination might have some influence on where we go and why we turn certain corners at a given time. On the other hand, it might be serendipity and all kinds of other things at play. Never is it exclusively moi. No way for any of us. Not possible. At best, we are a part of a mix, and we come with something, either curiosity or an energy that just drives us in a certain direction. Mm-hmm. We come with something. We make we are a raw material that is included in the process. But the elements that make up that in which we are included can be all kinds of elements, some tangible, some not, some physical, some otherwise, and some scientific, etc., etc., etc. And all that mix, if you examine them, none of which we control or even understand. So therefore, for our egos to get in the center of that mix and pass a judgment as to its importance in it, not very useful.
So it has nothing to do with you. You're just a very lucky guy.
I am a lucky guy. I am a lucky guy. You say that flippantly, but it is true.
In your life, due to luck or knowledge, or what is it?
I am a lucky guy. I'm a lucky guy among other things. I'm a lucky guy who was curious. You see, I'm a lucky guy who was able to stay the course in terms of what he wanted to do, what he wanted to see. But there are guys who were not lucky who stayed the course as well.
That's true.
You see, and there are guys who were curious and stayed the course and were not lucky. So the valuation has to be without ego, without self-interest, because otherwise it's a disrespect of those elements that were absolutely indispensable to whatever you perceive as your successful journey. You leave room. I mean, I think giving the ego its due is okay, but don't build any altar to it. It gets in the way.
Talk about being knighted. How did that come about? And what's the process?
I don't altogether know the specifics of how the process operates, but I do know
What process?
knighthood. I was knighted by the Queen here in the Bahamas. Not that she came here, but it is the ritual is performed here on her behalf. I was suggested for knighthood by Lyndon Pinling. We were very, very close friends from when we were both very young here in Nassau. As a matter of fact, when I first came to Nassau, I met him. He was one of the guys near the Ross Corner area because he lived just a block away. He and his fellows placed me on a list, I suppose, and that's how it eventually happened. I can't tell you much more about it. I have the whatever they give you, and whatever you put up here and stuff. But I felt honored by that because it is handed to people who have been in some way useful, and so I appreciate that coming from the country and from the leadership of the country.
In a very active way, you saw your country change to majority rule in 1967 and gain full independence in 1973. Talk about that. And I think we have talked about that, though. I think to an extent we have. And add, I know that your most important relationship was with Sir Kendall Isaacs. Tell me about him, his stature, and his role in your friendship.
Well, Kendall Isaacs was a very good friend of mine, old friend. I remember he used to go to school up where I went to school, in the eastern part of the island. When I first saw him, as a matter of fact, I saw him playing football, soccer on the Eastern Parade Ground. He was such a terrific athlete and a very cool-looking kid. I mean, he was really always splendidly well-dressed and very well contained in personality-wise.
Was he a middle-class kid?
Middle-class kid, very well-reared kid, wonderful manners, very smart, very smart. And he was, when I got to know him well, we came from kind of different sides of the tracks. Mm-hmm. And for a long time I admired him from a distance because he had a kind of carriage and a kind of way about him that I rather liked. And years later, when I became an actor and stuff, our paths would cross again several times, and slowly we became very, very close friends. And he was a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. And there were other guys I had, friends.
Well, before we leave Sir Kendall, was he instrumental in gaining independence? Or
of course, he was instrumental in gaining independence. He was instrumental in gaining independence, as was most of the people on the island. I mean, they had to vote for the PLP. They had to vote, and the PLP at that time was the standard bearer of the hopes and dreams of the Bahamian people, of the native Bahamian people. Kendall was no different from those people. He wanted to see this country independent. He wanted to see all of the benefits that were brought to this country by independence. And but he was principally he was an intellect. He was an exquisite man of letters and the law. And his whole life he remained thus until he died. But he also was a member of the opposition at one time, and he functioned quite effectively as that. And he brought to the process of democracy an undeniable clarity and the power of having a democracy in which there is a tireless, strong, and committed opposition force.
What do you mean by opposition?
Opposition. The Democrats are presently the opposition in the House in America, for instance. Two parties that form the foundation of the democracy, as it did here in this country, was supposed to do here in this country in the old days before the PLP won the election. But then the fair participation of the majority of Bahamian people in their own destiny was possible after the victory of the PLP. And Kendall Isaacs, in that period and in the subsequent period when he became a member of the opposition party, became the head of the opposition party, as a matter of fact, he functioned in a way that kept focus on what was absolutely necessary to nurture and to strengthen the democratic process, and also to keep the incumbency aware of what the aspirations of the community are. He was very good at that, and he became an icon in the country.
What was it about him that inspired you so?
He was, I suppose, his passion for learning, his passion for fairness, his passion, his stick-to-itiveness. He pursued politics when politics was not the core of himself. With other guys, politics was, they were experienced at it, they loved it, and they pursued it as politicians. He was essentially other things, you know. He was a scholar, and he was extremely well-read, not just in the law, but he was well-read in philosophy and in other areas of life. He was just kind of a Renaissance guy, you know. He just knew so much.
And what did you get out personally of your friendship with him?
When you sit down with a guy like Kendall Isaacs to discuss a question, you can feel absolutely free to go in any direction on a question. He was always, to my knowledge, able to deal deeper than the cosmetic appearance on any issue. That's how well learned he was. That's how well read he was. And I find that stimulating, because I am curious. He's had a deeper education than I ever was able to get. I admired what he knew, and I liked to be exposed to that mind and the things that came out of it. By the same token, we were able to play golf together, we were able to play tennis together, we were able to spend time together and just be a couple of regular guys doing tennis or doing golf or talking about trivial, unimportant things. That's the kind of friend he was. He was had an all-around impact on me. And I miss him.
Where were you when he died?
I was in South Africa
When?
I came here for his funeral. Good man he was. Good man. Did wonderfully well by his country, and he was given a national hero's funeral. He was given such a magnificent funeral.
Did you speak?
I said some words, yes. Yes.
Okay. And one who can be a buddy and be an intellect like that, totally rare.
And that's what he was, you know. He was rare. He was totally rare. He was... and he could laugh easily and self-deprecating. He would tell jokes on himself. And had a great confidence
In himself.
in himself, but also in his wife.
In his wife?
Yeah. He was Patsy Isaacs. He was when he was ill, and as the disease progressed, she was early in her life a nurse. And the degree to which he just completely turned himself over to her was so... oh boy, it was touching. It was just touching.
Don't you think that there is a kind of terrible unfairness in a man with that kind of brain and that kind of knowledge to be hit with Alzheimer's?
Do I think it's an unfairness?
An incredible, you know.
You're asking a question that puts me in the position of judgeship. I think to be
Ironic. Awful.
Ironic, applicable, yes. But to have had that kind of life, to have had that kind of intellect, to have understood as much as he understood, and to have that kind of curiosity. He was already blessed, you see. And the Alzheimer's took his life at the age of 73 or 4. So he had a lot of years when his mind was as sharp and as quick and as probing as ever, you know. So we weigh that against the onslaught of Alzheimer's, which killed him after a few years. I mean, there is no trade-off. There is no real trade-off there, because what he was a gift, you know. If the Alzheimer's took 5 years to kill him, he had 69 great years. And of those 69 great years, he was useful to his country. He was certainly a joy to his friends and his family. And in the history of the Bahamas, Colonel Isaacs will have a place. If we all go like that, however it is, if we leave behind us that kind of journey that will be remembered and appreciated, what takes us out is not really so much the matter.
We have listened to a great story about the life and career of Sidney Poitier. Has anyone ever visited the Bahamas before it got its independence and after? I would love to know the difference. And the interviewer didn't ask Sidney this question, so I'm going to ask you. Let me know in the comments, how do you think he will want to be best remembered?